Welcome to Empathy Stories, where we explore powerful tales of resilience, understanding, and the human spirit. Today, we bring you the inspiring journey of Marcus, a soldier who faced prejudice on his home soil but responded with dignity and strength, leaving an unforgettable mark on those around him. Stay tuned for a story that reminds us of the power of integrity and the potential for change, even in the unlikeliest of places. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the North Carolina sky in hues of burnt orange and purple. As Marcus pulled his old pickup truck into the gravel parking lot of Elliot's Taproom, it was the kind of place that had a story for every scratch on its wooden floor and every dent in its bar counter. Nestled just off Highway 74 in Fayetteville. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. This was where locals, truckers, and weary travelers sought solace, a cold drink, and a quiet moment away from life's relentless demands. Marcus stepped out of the truck, the creak of its door blending into the soft chirping of crickets. He adjusted his camouflage uniform, now slightly faded from years of wear and countless washes. His sneakers, a pair of scuffed, comfortable ones he had chosen over the rigid military boots, peeked out from under his fatigues. It wasn't standard, but tonight wasn't about appearances. He had just returned from deployment, and all he wanted was a moment of peace before diving back into the routine of civilian life. As he pushed open the creaky door, the warm, familiar sounds of Elliot's enveloped him. The hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, and the soft melody of Johnny Cash playing from an old jukebox created a comforting symphony. Marcus scanned the room, noting the regulars. A couple of men were playing pool in the corner, their laughter punctuating the occasional thud of a cue hitting a ball. At the bar, a group of friends chatted animatedly, while a few loners nursed their drinks in reflective silence. Marcus wasn't looking to engage. He had no interest in conversation or small talk. Instead, he gravitated toward a corner table at the back, a spot where he could observe the room without being the center of attention. Sliding into the seat, he ordered a glass of water and let his thoughts drift. Images of his family filled his mind, his mother's comforting smile, his niece's laughter. The anticipation of finally reuniting with them tugged at his heart, and he felt a rare warmth settle in his chest. The peaceful moment shattered abruptly. The door swung open with force, slamming against the wall and drawing every gaze in the bar toward the entrance. A group of 6 men entered, their boots pounding heavily on the wooden floor. They exuded a loud, boisterous energy, their laughter and rough voices overpowering the room. Marcus recognized the patches and insignias on their leather jackets. These men were veterans too, but there was something in their demeanor, an air of superiority, a need to dominate that set him on edge. He kept his gaze steady, giving them a brief glance before turning back to his glass. Experience had taught him not to engage unless necessary. Yet, as his fingers wrapped around the cool glass, he felt their stares lingering. The leader of the group, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, seemed to take particular interest in Marcus. His laughter died mid-sentence, and his piercing eyes locked onto Marcus like a predator spotting prey. He muttered something to his companions, and the group's focus shifted entirely to the soldier sitting quietly at the back. The atmosphere in the bar changed. What had been a lively, light-hearted space now felt heavy, tense. The men at the pool table hesitated mid-shot, their eyes flickering toward the group of newcomers. The bartender, who had been pouring a drink, slowed his movements, his gaze darting nervously toward Marcus. Still, Marcus remained calm. His years in the service had taught him the value of composure. Even in the face of hostility, the group began to move. Their boots thudded against the floor as they approached Marcus's table. The leader, his smirk widening with every step, stopped just a few feet away. The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with anticipation. Marcus set his glass down deliberately, leaning back slightly in his chair. His posture was relaxed, but his muscles were ready, trained to react in an instant if the need arose. "Nice uniform," the leader barked, his voice gravelly and dripping with mockery. "Where'd you get it? A Halloween store?" The men behind him erupted into laughter. their tones grating and filled with disdain. Marcus looked up, his face unreadable. He'd heard insults before, far worse than this. "It's mine," he replied evenly. "Earned it." The leader raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Earned it? Huh? That's funny. I've seen plenty of real soldiers, and none of them wear sneakers with their fatigues. What are you trying to pull? Looking for sympathy? A free drink? Maybe." The words hit Marcus like tiny needles, not for their sharpness, but for their sheer ignorance. Yet, he remained composed. "I don't need sympathy," he said, "and I'm not here for a free drink. Just here to enjoy my evening." But the leader wasn't satisfied. He leaned in closer, his beer-soaked breath invading Marcus's space. "You don't look like no soldier to me," he sneered. "Where's your boots? Your tags? Hell, you probably don't even know how to salute properly." The men behind him chimed in, each adding their own jabs, their laughter growing louder and more abrasive. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Silence was his weapon, his shield. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm brewed. He'd faced enemies in war zones, stared death in the face, and survived. But this was a different kind of battle, one that cut deeper because it came from within his own country. "I don't need to prove anything to you," Marcus said finally, his voice calm but firm. His words carried weight, a quiet authority that momentarily silenced the group. But the leader, fueled by pride and the desire to assert dominance, refused to back down. He smirked again, his eyes narrowing as he stepped closer. "You think you're some kind of hero, walking in here like you belong?" His tone was laced with venom. Marcus met his gaze, unflinching. "I've served 3 tours overseas," he said, his voice steady, "and I don't need your approval to belong anywhere." The room held its breath. For a moment, even the jukebox seemed to quiet. The leader hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of Marcus's words. Yet, he couldn't let it go. He scoffed, the sound hollow. "Prove it," he demanded. "Show us your tags. Otherwise, you're nothing but a liar." Marcus didn't move, his expression unchanging. His years of service, the sacrifices he had made, they weren't up for debate. And as the tension in the room reached a breaking point, the battle lines were drawn, though neither side yet knew how this confrontation would end. A few days had passed since the incident at Elliot's taproom, but for Marcus, the memory lingered like a bad taste in his mouth. Not because of the confrontation itself. He had faced far worse during his tours overseas, but because of what it symbolized. Prejudice, ignorance, and judgment were battles he thought he'd left behind. Yet here they were, rearing their ugly heads in the very country he'd risked his life to protect. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across Marcus's small home on the outskirts of Fayetteville. His pickup truck stood in the driveway, its hood propped open as he worked to tighten a bolt. The rhythmic scrape of his wrench against metal provided a kind of solace, grounding him in the present and keeping his hands busy. He wiped sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his shirt, letting out a slow breath as the sound of distant cicadas filled the air. The faint crunch of tires on gravel caught his attention. Marcus straightened, setting his wrench down and turning toward the driveway. A motorcycle was approaching, its rider slowing as they neared. Marcus squinted, the sunlight glinting off the bike's chrome, when the engine cut off and the rider dismounted. Marcus recognized him immediately. It was one of the bikers from the bar, the wiry man with thinning hair and a leather jacket that hung awkwardly on his frame. His name was Bill. If Marcus remembered correctly, Bill removed his helmet, hesitating as he held it in both hands. His posture was cautious, his movements slow, as though he were approaching a stray dog that might bolt or bite. Marcus crossed his arms and leaned against the truck, his expression unreadable. He wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but he also wasn't in the mood for another confrontation. "Marcus, right?" Bill asked, his voice quieter than Marcus had expected. Marcus nodded but said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. Bill shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his boots. "Look, I just wanted to come by and say I'm sorry for what happened at the bar." The words hung in the air, unexpected, and almost surreal. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his skepticism evident. "You were part of it," he said evenly, his tone neither accusatory nor forgiving. Bill nodded quickly, guilt etched into his features. "I know, and I didn't stop it. I should have, but I didn't. Hank, he's got a way of riling people up, you know? And I went along with it. Doesn't make it right. Though." He swallowed hard, his atoms apple bobbing. "I've been thinking about it ever since. And, well, I just wanted to tell you that." Marcus studied him, his dark eyes scanning for any hint of insincerity. Apologies like this were rare, and they often came wrapped in ulterior motives. "Why now?" he asked, his voice steady but edged with curiosity. Bill let out a long sigh, stuffing his hands into the pockets of his jacket. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because, well, seeing you handle yourself the way you did, it made me realize how wrong we were. You didn't deserve any of that." For a long moment, Marcus said nothing. He simply observed Bill, weighing his words against his demeanor. The man's discomfort was obvious, but so was his sincerity. He wasn't there to save face or excuse his actions. He was there to take responsibility. Finally, Marcus sighed and leaned more heavily against the truck. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his tone softer now, less guarded. Bill's eyes met his, earnest and full of something that resembled hope. "Forgiveness, I guess," he said. "But more than that, I want to be better. I've seen a lot of hate in my life, and I don't want to add to it anymore. What we did was wrong, and I need to own up to it." Marcus's expression softened, though only slightly. He had heard apologies before, some genuine, others hollow. This one felt different, not because of the words, but because of the effort it had taken for Bill to show up at all. That kind of humility was rare, and it wasn't lost on Marcus. "I appreciate you coming here," Marcus said finally. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." Relief washed over Bill's face, his shoulders sagging as though a weight had been lifted. "Thanks, man," he said, his voice almost breaking. "I mean it." Marcus nodded, though he remained stoic. Forgiveness wasn't something he handed out lightly, but he could respect the courage it took for Bill to stand there and admit his mistakes. As Bill turned to mount his bike, Marcus spoke again. "Next time," he said, his tone firm but not unkind, "don't just think about doing the right thing. Do it." Bill paused, nodding solemnly before starting his engine. As the motorcycle roared to life and disappeared down the road, Marcus stood in the driveway, watching until the dust settled. A strange mix of emotions swirled within him. Frustration at the lingering sting of the bar incident, but also a glimmer of hope. Bill's apology was small in the grand scheme of things, but it was meaningful. It was proof that people could change, even if it came one step at a time. Turning back to his truck, Marcus wiped his hands on a rag, his mind already moving past the encounter. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over. It wasn't a battle fought in a single bar or with a single apology. It was an ongoing struggle, one that required patience, strength, and unwavering integrity. And if Marcus had learned anything from his years of service, it was that the hardest battles were often the ones worth fighting the most. The days following Bill's visit were quiet, yet Marcus couldn't shake the weight of their conversation. It wasn't the apology itself that stuck with him. He'd learned long ago not to let words alone carry too much meaning, but the fact that Bill had shown up at all. It was a small, unpolished act of courage, but one that hinted at the possibility of something greater. Change, Marcus thought, wasn't often grand or dramatic. It came in increments, in fleeting moments like this. It was a cool evening in Fayetteville. The sun was beginning its descent, bathing the neighborhood in soft golden light. Marcus sat on the small porch of his home, sipping coffee from a mug that had seen better days. His hands rested lightly on the cup, the warmth soothing against his skin as he watched the world around him. The hum of cicadas filled the air, their rhythm a familiar background to his thoughts. Life after deployment had been an adjustment, as it always was. The quiet here felt different from the quiet overseas. There, silence carried the weight of danger, the possibility of chaos erupting at any moment. Here, it felt still, almost peaceful, yet it wasn't without its challenges. The confrontation at Elliot's taproom had been a sharp reminder of the struggles he faced on home soil. Prejudice wasn't new to Marcus. He'd encountered it in many forms, from whispered slurs to overt hostility. But what gnawed at him most was the realization that his uniform, the very symbol of his service and sacrifice, didn't shield him from judgment. He glanced toward his old pickup truck parked in the driveway, its hood now securely shut after the afternoon's work. The truck had been with him for years, a constant companion through life's twists and turns. It was dependable, sturdy, much like the values Marcus tried to embody. Responsibility, respect, resilience. These were lessons he had carried with him from the battlefield to the home front. As the evening deepened, Marcus's thoughts returned to Bill. He wondered what had prompted the man to show up, to offer an apology that couldn't have been easy. It was one thing to regret an action. It was another to take steps toward making amends. Marcus respected that. It didn't erase the harm, but it was a step in the right direction. Perhaps, he thought, Bill's visit wasn't just about guilt. Maybe it was about understanding, an attempt to break free from the cycle of ignorance that had bound him. The memory of the bar incident played out in Marcus's mind again. But this time, it didn't carry the same sting. Instead, it felt like a lesson, a moment that had revealed not just the ugliness of prejudice, but also the strength of character required to confront it. Marcus had stood his ground, not with anger or violence, but with dignity. And in doing so, he had planted a seed, one that had compelled Bill to reflect, to reevaluate, and to take the first step toward change. Marcus took another sip of his coffee, the warmth spreading through him as he stared out at the horizon. The battles he faced now weren't the kind that could be won with weapons or strategy. They were fought in the hearts and minds of those around him, in the quiet moments when choices were made to either perpetuate hate or challenge it. These battles, he realized, were just as important as the ones he had fought overseas. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of children's laughter drifting from a nearby yard. He turned his head slightly, catching a glimpse of his neighbor's kids playing tag under the watchful eye of their mother. The sight brought a small, fleeting smile to his face. It reminded him of why he had chosen to serve, why he had endured the hardships of deployment. It wasn't just for himself. It was for them, for the generations that deserved a world better than the one he had grown up in. The sun dipped lower, the sky transitioning from gold to a deep, velvety blue. Marcus rose from his chair and stepped off the porch, the cool grass brushing against his boots as he walked toward his truck. He placed a hand on its hood, the metal cool beneath his fingers. In that moment, he made a quiet vow to himself. He would continue to live with integrity, to face each day with the same strength and composure that had carried him through war zones and beyond. And he would remain open to the possibility of change, no matter how small or incremental it might be. As the cicadas sang their evening chorus and the first stars began to appear in the sky, Marcus felt a sense of calm settle over him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it never had been. What mattered was that he kept moving forward, not just for himself, but for those who looked to him as an example of what it meant to endure, to rise above, and to inspire. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the most profound victories didn't come from battles fought with others. They came from the quiet, resolute decision to keep believing in the goodness of people, even when it seemed hard to find. And as he turned back toward his house, the faint glow of its porch light guiding his steps, Marcus felt a glimmer of hope, a reminder that even in the face of ignorance and hate, understanding and empathy could still take root and grow. Thank you for joining us on Empathy Stories. Marcus's journey teaches us that even in the face of ignorance and adversity, strength, compassion, and understanding can pave the way for meaningful change. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring tales that remind us of the humanity in all of us. Until next time, stay empathetic and keep spreading kindness.